Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Bernt-Santy, and Mike Heber is here. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
We're going to do another, we haven't done one of these episodes in like a long time,
A
but we're
long
going to
time.
do one of the episodes we call Mike Asks Heather, where we don't really have a quote, but Mike has listened to another episode of the show and has questions for me.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's been so long that when we first started doing it,
Yeah.
I would try to like take an episode because you always talk about in this theoretical thing. I was like, but what do you do in your classroom? You know?
Yeah.
And so this one, I'm going to do the same thing, but since you're not in a class, well, you are in a
Yeah.
classroom for adults, but I'm tying it more to something else you're working on right now. So you're writing about schema.
Oh, okay.
So now I have to give the context.
Yeah.
So I re-listened to the episode 326 for those keeping score.
Yes.
Connections over compliance with, you pronounced the name on the episode, and Dr.
Lori
Lori
Desautels, I think.
Desautels. Okay.
Desautels, yeah. I said it wrong on the episode, but
right.
I think that's
yeah, so I'll blame you for
not
remembering how.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I re-listened to it because I remember back in July when I first heard it, there was something I was like, oh, I want to ask Heather about this. And usually I listen in the car, so I did not pull over and immediately text you. So just 4 months later,
we'll do it very formal.
Oh, I know. But that episode is about essentially dysregulation, perhaps how trauma might affect behavior and things like that. And so trying to have the teacher in that dynamic, keep that in mind, right? That focusing on compliance actually can further stress the child out. And if your goal is to minimize that behavior, or even hopefully this part, replace it with a more pro-social behavior, or have the child get more skills so they know how to be more pro-social. And when you focus on compliance, it just stresses the child out. It actually puts them even more into that fight, flight, or freeze stance. So they aren't going to actually come up with a replacement behavior. And part of what she said at the time was, people will often talk about, but I do this, behavior chart, and I've always done it and it works. And then right, and I think it was you, it was one of, or both of you kind of was, so the child you do that for doesn't do that behavior anymore. Like, did they stop doing it? It's like, well, no, but that's just, and in a way it gets to the point where, well, those kids have a problem with it.
Yes.
And so what you're doing is you're creating this system where these are the kids who will always get the red light, or whatever the particular system is, because they're the ones who are struggling with whatever it is. Could be social skills, it could be executive function skills, whatever it is. So they keep getting in trouble for it. And it's all, I think what teachers are noticing is the other kids aren't doing it. Therefore, it must work because it's sort of like the warning to the other kids.
Yeah, it's working for most of us. So those it doesn't work for, it must be a them problem.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I thought it was a great episode talking about, how kids can get dysregulated, why they might, it starts with relationship. They need that trusting relationship. The one thing you didn't get into, and it wasn't part of the episode, but what I want to ask you about is, what if the behavior isn't about dysregulation? It's simply behaviors children do as part of natural development, but they get in trouble for it. So, thinking about essentially schema, like when a kid's dumping things out and being told, and in trouble, is relative, because with toddlers, it's not like you go on timeout or you get a sticker.
Sometimes they do.
Okay, so I'm so out of all that. But,
right? Yeah, in our bubble they don't.
But even then, it's even the, whatever. It's like, Bethany, why did you dump that out again? I keep telling you to stop dumping that. This sort of Bethany's frustration
problem.
Yeah. So the dysregulation's in the adult, not the child, but it's over behavior that isn't about fight, flight, or freeze. It's not about dysregulation. It's simply things they do. In a way, it'd be similar to an infant who keeps crying when their diaper is soiled or when they need something in general. And you think, stop crying versus, oh, why are you crying? Let's figure that out. I know that actually gets into more dysregulation. That was a bad example.
Well,
child pulling themselves up when they're learning to walk. And it's just like, I don't want you to get to the stuff on the table. Sit back down. Stop pulling yourself up.
Yeah.
That's a better example.
Stop progressing.
Stop progressing.
Yeah, that's interesting that this is what you wanted to ask, because I do a workshop, a webinar called like a new lens for viewing behavior. And in that and in conversations for the last few years, I've been saying, I wish that I didn't even have to use the word misbehavior. Like I wish that we could just get that out of our vocabulary, or even challenging behavior. And you and I both have talked about switching to behavior that's challenging for us or whatever.
Right.
But I follow this TikTok account called Primrose Permaculture, and she's an unschooler and smart person about many things. But one of the videos she made was so bold, and it's what I've sort of been wishing I could say, but wasn't brave enough to say. And she just said, misbehavior doesn't even exist. Like it's just development. It's just environments. It's just mismatches or misunderstandings. Misbehavior itself does not exist, especially in early childhood. And I was like, yeah, that's what I wish I had been brave enough to say to people about this. But I think, yeah, sometimes it's dysregulation. Sometimes it's just a skill they don't have yet. And we don't need to worry about them having it. Like we don't even that approach to working with behavior that's challenging for us is a little bit off the mark sometimes when we say, well, we just need to then focus on teaching them the skill we want them to have. Or we could just wait, or we could just say, do I need to change something myself? Like I think I think the trauma and the resilience and the dysregulation conversation is so useful because it's attention getting and it has like a validity to it. People will say, oh, that's science. Okay. But when I just come out and say, oh, I think misbehavior is a myth, no one's like, oh yeah, Heather's really got that figured out. They're gonna be like, no, shut down.
Well, and it is the feeling you get when you're in the classroom and a kid is trying to run out of the room or is hitting someone else or something like that, so the adult, and that's that whole idea that the adult is being challenged right now. And so the phrase, oh, misbehavior is just a myth, might not be the mantra they need in the moment. It can be for other times, of figuring out what to do. And maybe it is like, oh, it is development. Because you think about that with infants when they're grabbing another child's hair or whatever, that it's not like you're going to teach a replacement behavior. You're simply going to redirect, knowing that soon enough they will have more, they will develop and not be doing those behaviors. But then when it's a 5-year-old who is exhibiting it, you might, they're missing something.
Right. So I'm not saying, I'm not saying there's never a skill that we could work on, but sometimes
I do
there's
think
not.
but
or sometimes it's not the right time.
I've been in a toddler room the last few weeks, several hours each day, some the full, 8 hours. And it is that thing of you have to stop yourself every so often, remember, or else you get into that mode where you are saying, Bethany, I've already talked to you about this, and just realizing, it's just going to take time. And, you do what you can so no one's hurt, and you redirecting, that's where redirecting rather than teaching a skill is the strategy you use. But that's when it's helpful to remember, okay, this is just development. They're doing fine. If the child's particularly big, you have to remember how old they actually are, or whatever.
But I think if they never heard me say, in any context, oh, misbehavior is a myth, or
Right.
then they're not going to maybe get to that point where they're
Yeah, yeah.
pausing it's so yeah, I'm not saying if I was like in a coaching situation and
Right,
a
right.
teacher was struggling in front of me with something a child was doing, that I'd be like, well, misbehavior is just a myth, so move on. That's
Yeah.
not what I'm saying.
Yeah. But in a podcast context
But
or
it's
teaching
a
a
good,
class,
yeah,
I think it's good.
yeah. I think redirecting has become more interesting to me lately. I used to,
Hmm.
of course, it's a tool that we have in there, but I used to be sort of dismissive of it in terms of effectiveness
Oh,
to
yeah.
change anything. But it's an easy thing to put in a list of responses that we could have. But when I've been lately thinking about and writing about schema play, redirecting is back in my brain a lot,
Oh, yeah.
because I think what happens sometimes with redirecting is we give an option that's sort of similar, but not meeting the same need, or
Yes.
sort
Yeah.
of feeling the same, or following the interest of the child closely enough. Like, I think about throwing,
Hmm.
because I'm in the middle of the trajectory chapter,
Right, right.
where maybe a child's throwing wooden unit blocks,
Yeah.
and that's obviously gonna result in tears, and isn't something I want to just let them play out. Just sit back and
Right,
say,
right.
well, let's just see what happens. But if I give them um something like a balled up socks to throw, that's
Right.
not the same feeling. It's not the same kind of thrill, maybe. It's not the
Hmm.
same sound. It's not the same
Wait.
resistance. Yeah,
Yeah.
weight. So it's not going to be as interesting, maybe. And then we see, well, I tried redirection and it doesn't work. Well,
Right.
we just maybe need to look closer at what the child is actually experiencing in the
Right.
thing that they're doing that we don't want them to do. Um, and how closely can I approximate that in a different way that's less of a
Right. And
risk?
that's the thing of it's not like in that case, I think the block one's a good example of it's not just the verb, it's not
Uh-huh.
just throwing,
Yeah.
it's the sensory input the child's receiving
Yeah.
in throwing as much as it is the throwing.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing that happened in the last few weeks in the room I was in, so I had brought a newspaper for the kids can rip it up or just throw it, and I was really focusing on doing these big arm motions, right? So I would
Mhm.
hold like a newspaper that hadn't been ripped and really like going up and down, and they're just watching it move, and they're all excited, so they take just grab as much as they can and throw it up.
Uh-huh.
But there was something about the child who, so there is a child who is at that, like throwing objects is their
Mhm.
thing, and they do sometimes throw the wooden blocks, and it like finding something that even though I didn't have another thing that weight with the newspaper, you could be really like um you could grab so much of it and make this huge change. So it was a different stimulus, but I think it was
Uh-huh.
enough of that same excitement or
Yeah.
whatever. The cause and effect
Yeah.
was big
Yeah.
enough or
Yeah.
something.
And I think maybe even a feeling of being sort of transgressive, like not a subconscious thought that the toddler's
Yeah,
like, ooh,
yeah,
this is taboo, but throwing something that's hard and heavy, or interacting with paper in that kind of a way, sort of
right,
feels, where if I'd said, oh, don't rip that. Come over here and I'll show you how to use the scissors.
right, right.
Not
Yeah,
only is there maybe a skill mismatch, there's also sort of a thrill level
right,
mismatch.
right. I do think, yeah, the thrill level is definitely there, right? That regardless of what it is, they want a big reaction,
Yeah.
and teachers tend to want a small reaction, or,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
it's like you could throw one thing, or, just that, so Tom Bedard's work with sensory tables comes into play a lot when
Yeah.
I think of these things of, oh, they're going to want to dump the sand. Like the whole idea,
Yeah.
if you have sand in a table,
Yep.
the first thing they're going to want to do is move it out of the table.
Yeah.
And rather than just trying to keep telling them, put it back in the table, put it back in the table, give them a place to put it that is still,
Yeah.
you're able to clean. And even just in that toddler room, the teacher moved the sensory table, like, as they were, figuring it out more, right? Of, oh, there's three sides that the stuff can't go very far.
Yeah.
There's still one wall or one side that, it can really
Yeah.
spread out, but it's
I love to
not.
just surround the sand table with buckets and other sensory tubs
Right,
all
right,
around,
yeah.
just so they can do all that stuff that they want to do, and I don't have
Yeah.
to
And
worry
if
about
things
it too
go
much.
flying a little bit, like fall out, if it's more like beans or wood
Yeah,
pellets or
yeah,
whatever, they don't bounce,
yeah.
40 feet,
Yes, bouncing.
or not all of
Yes,
them.
right. Yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah. That's a good idea. Good job, Tom Bedard.
I know he's a smart guy. Um, yeah, I don't know if you were going to say something next.
No, I was trying to think of other examples, um, specific to like redirecting, just because I know that is such a common and a good thing to try, right? I'm not being critical of that. I just have, as I get, I don't know, older and have tried more things, it seems like it's a good thing to try, but it's not always effective. Like,
Right,
it doesn't always hook the child, that redirected thing. And so thinking about big body stuff, that's the other.
right,
Um, a lot of movement gets sort of classified or responded to as if it was misbehavior
right.
because it doesn't fit our small space or our
Yep,
intent for the area that you're in or comfort level.
yeah,
um and but children, they are their bodies. They
yeah,
aren't going to wait. They aren't going to say, oh yeah, in 20 minutes I'll go outside and have 20 minutes to do this, so I'll just
right.
hang
And they
tight.
weren't the ones who designed the room. I mean, that's
Right.
the interesting thing is that room design for early childhood has never been designed by people who are experts. I'm especially thinking of toddlers, true of
Yes.
preschoolers too,
Yeah.
but toddlers, you can see it the most where the amount of space like that they'll often have in licensing and
Yeah.
things is based on the idea of they're this big,
Hmm.
whatever. So
You
they're
have a
smaller
smaller
than
group
yeah,
size.
they're smaller group size, smaller humans. So you need
Yeah.
this much space. It's not based on how much does the average toddler move? Because
Uh-huh.
I know in the toddler room, I'm doing 10,000 steps in this whatever 20 by 20 room, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not very big and I am moving all the time.
Yeah.
And yet, if I went to a college class and presented to the same
Hmm.
number of people, we
Hmm.
could fit in that space because everyone's going to sit down and maybe
Right.
someone will stand up in the back. But each person is not taking up 20 feet. Like each toddler
Right.
in a classroom easily takes up 20 square feet.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned before, maybe the toddler is bigger than the other children in the room. So this child who's bigger than the other children and also still trying to navigate just being upright and walking and physical and trying to navigate
And where
spatial
their body starts and
relationships.
stops. And if I'm moving
Yes,
this fast, where
yes,
will I be in
and
5 seconds?
momentum and managing all that, starts plowing through groups of other toddlers and gets labeled as aggressive when that's a space issue.
Right.
That's not a toddler behavior issue.
Yeah. And it is hard because the teacher doesn't have control over that.
Right. Yes.
And
Yeah.
so,
Other than
like,
our
what?
expectation and our response, those are the
Right.
things that we have control over.
Yeah. Yeah. And in our space, one of the things, because clearly the rooms themselves are still the size, because it's a new building,
Hmm.
but the different design is that there's third spaces,
Oh.
right? And so outside of the toddler room, there's, I don't know, an alcove, I guess I'd call it, and it has like one of those little, the three steps and a slide
Oh.
and
Uh-huh.
some mats and some balls and things. And it's between the infant and toddler room. So sometimes the infants use it for the kids who are movers can really move around when a lot of the, non-mobile infants are
Yeah.
awake and, on the floor. And in the toddler room, same thing, like we'll often in the morning kind of have some kids in that space while others are in the room. So in a way, it's addressing some of that.
Yeah.
And part of it is the hard thing of because there is the same amount of public funding. And even if there was,
Hmm.
I am sure if it was in a school district, they're going to simply say, well, oh, there's only 14 kids. Well, then let's go turn
Go
this
a smaller
closet
room.
into
Yeah.
a classroom.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, oh, it's 14 toddlers and they're going to need more space than
Yeah.
30 third graders. Let's give them the
Yeah.
biggest classroom in the building.
Yeah.
Right. And then when you're, a nonprofit and trying to, even if you got funding for a building, you're not going to convince anyone that you need all this space.
Yeah.
Floor space is expensive. So I get that.
Yeah. Unless you're Tiffany Pearsall, who is like the licensing waiver writing wizard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, if, I know, I have problems with autocracy and,
Yes. Yeah.
but if Tiffany Pearsall was the one in charge, I would be fine.
Yeah.
Just,
Right. I'll accept that kind of autocracy.
yeah, exactly.
We love you, Tiffany, if you're listening. um, so I had another thought. Of course, it's gone. That one's for Kisa. She says she loves it when I say that on the show. She thinks
Perfect.
it's really funny. So, um, I don't know. I'm thinking about um the choices teachers do have
Right.
now. I'm glad that because sometimes I forget to acknowledge that I understand the reality that people are working in because I've been a toddler teacher in a tiny
Right.
classroom.
Well, I do think it's important. This is where Tiffany comes in, right? It's like it's important, and Kylie Cooper from my school, it's important to have the people who are going to say, but
Yeah.
we can also think about what if we actually gave toddlers the space
Yeah.
that we know they do. And not everyone can afford that right now, but what if at least like university lab schools did that?
Yes. It's the people who are sort of setting up ideal
Right.
settings and
Like,
have a little bit more
yeah,
funding.
like the field would never change if we
Right.
only based it on what we do currently.
What we already can see. Yeah.
Right. It's like, just having like daylight, like having windows, for
Yeah.
so long, whatever, nursery school back in the day, it's like in the basement of a church.
Yeah.
Or whatever. There wasn't like, oh, we need to find a place where there's windows and kids get sunlight.
Yeah.
Or we need kids to be outside more, or whatever. All these things were not considered important. And other people pushed back on it, actually. A lot of behaviors, again, going to a lot of challenging behaviors disappear if you're outside majority of the day.
Yeah. Or have more space. Like I think
or
about
have more space.
The first one of the first early childhood or childcare programs I worked in was in a church, and we had 24 2-year-olds. It was a long time ago in a state far, far away. We had 24 2-year-olds, 4 grown-ups, and an enormous room, like one of those big church rooms that you can divide up with folding walls or whatever. And but the church had the childcare center, but the people that went to church or whatever didn't want to see signs of the childcare. So we couldn't have anything in our space that couldn't be put away every Wednesday and Friday.
Right.
Which at the time and even since I've thought, oh, boy, that was really garbage to just have that room and nothing in it. But now I'm almost to a point where I'd love to do it again and say, how would it be different now that I think differently about what we should be doing with toddlers and what a day with toddlers might look like and how important that
This is a vague memory, but Heather Schumacher in her book, I think it's what is it? You go up the slide, whatever,
It's okay to go up. It's okay.
It's okay to, it's one of her Renegade Rules books. She talks about a childcare center that maybe her daughter went to, but there was one room. So I think it was a converted house. But one of the things they did, there was one room that was kind of left untouched. And so you could go in and do stuff. So it was often the rough and tumble play. There was, I think if I'm remembering, boxing, where the kids got these giant gloves or
Love
something.
It, yes.
But just that idea that you'd have an extra space, and too often we think of that and it's only like, oh, here's the indoor gym. And it's almost this acknowledgement, oh yeah, kids do need to move around, but they're either going to be in this space that's echoey and they're all moving around, and the kids who don't feel like it are stuck in a space with echoey, loud, behavior, or you're in a space where you got to sit down or you got to walking feet or inside feet or whatever all that means. And it's like
side feet. Okay.
Is that something? No, they say inside voice. I
Oh,
guess,
okay.
which again, by definition, is a voice you use inside, which can be any volume.
Any voice that
If
you
you're
use when you're inside. Yeah.
right. And even that relative thing too, right? Of I very much include myself in this, but when an American such as myself goes to almost any other country,
Yeah.
I'm already kind of a loud person, but like in any other country, it's like I'm really loud.
Oh boy.
So this idea of indoor voice,
Hmm.
I think a lot of teachers coming, especially from like a middle class American
Yeah.
background, have this idea of, oh, it's like just a set thing. There's no OSHA standard on what an inside voice is, And if you go to any other country, that's different.
Okay. Yeah.
Even just going to Canada, you notice like, oh man, I'm really loud.
Yeah.
So so it's just that thing of like, that's such a subjective thing. And the idea that we think kids could understand when even we as adults often,
Yeah.
I mean, you get stuck in your culture. Like
Yeah.
it's the water you swim in, you don't
Yeah.
see it
But
until you get out of it.
we can make another connection here to schema because that could be transforming, changing your voice and
Right.
seeing how louder and quieter registers for you, what kind of different sensory input that gives your brain,
Right.
how it makes your body feel to do the louder and the quieter. Um, and I was
Right. It's
just,
actually often a standard in like somewhere in various state standards of
yeah,
modulating your voice,
yeah.
pitch, volume, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how many teachers are telling children to use their inside voice while the teachers, in fact, are using a very loud
Yep.
voice.
It's often, it's too loud in here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Your inside voice. This is my teacher
Yeah.
inside voice.
Right,
I want
right,
you to use
exactly.
your inside voices. I was just talking to, I just wrapped up an 8-week term in the Introduction to Early Childhood class at my college, and we were talking about play, surprisingly enough. And we were talking about what was it? Oh, I was telling the story of how I used to just keep a bunch of pool noodles around for
Right.
moments when it just was clear that everybody needed a little more than we had maybe space for in terms of running, but we could beat each other up
Right, right. Yeah.
with these pool noodles and audible gasps from a couple of students. Um, and we were talking about, well, what do you do when someone else comes and sees that and it looks like loss of control or it looks like misbehavior, even though in your space you're seeing it as just, sort of responsive
Right, right.
interacting with children. And I was like, well, that's where you have to be really skilled at talking about it. So again, schema comes in, and I said, that could be connecting and disconnecting socially
Right,
and
right.
actually physically with the pool noodles. If we can just, that's why we have to get really practiced at explaining our why
Right,
behind
right.
all of these things, and especially around behavior that's challenging to either deal with or to have
Right,
watched from
right.
the outside. And but it's hard because we get dysregulated, right?
Yeah,
Anyone
yeah.
comes in and says, how can you just let the children beat each other up with pool noodles?
Right.
I'm going to get into a state where I have to bring myself down a little bit before I can effectively
Right, right.
talk
And
about it.
this is another one where I think sometimes it's important to be able to talk about the why,
Hmm.
like especially when it's an administrator or a
Yeah.
parent or things like
Yeah.
that. But also, I think when you're in the classroom itself, um, I said this when we did the episode with Teaching with the Body and Mind and
Hmm.
Nerd, the
Yeah.
nerd
The
takeover of,
crossover.
yeah, the crossover. Thank you. And I don't think I'd ever said it this way before, but the children know something you don't,
Uh,
and they show you with behavior, right? And so
yeah.
that idea that if you're doing pool noodles and they are smiling, they are laughing,
Yeah.
and
They are free to get out of it if they don't
and,
want to do
and
it
yeah, any
anymore.
kid who is sort of ducking back knows they can
Hmm.
walk away
Hmm.
and no one else is going to go follow them and hit them. And there is a teacher to um, help with that if needed. But usually kids read that.
Yeah.
I mean, toddlers are a little different. They read it less quickly.
Yeah.
And part of
Yeah.
it's processing speed too. That's one thing I'm noticing in the toddler room
Uh-huh.
when the kids are, puppy pile sort of
Yeah.
crawling all over each other and their foot is hitting someone. the other child starts crying, the other child does stop,
There is a pause.
but it's not right at the moment. It's a little bit like when you do a freeze dance with like a 3-year-old and it takes them like, 4
Uh-huh.
bars before they actually stop. It's
Yeah.
mostly because all their classmates that have already stopped. And it's the same thing. So,
Yeah.
and if it's something that's actually like a foot in the face, I'm going to put my hand in between, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
they aren't noticing yet.
Hmm.
But they often do, but the processing speed is slower.
Yeah.
And at first they don't. And then slowly, oh, the crying sound is coming from a thing I'm doing, because cause and effect, they don't necessarily, oh, that child's crying, that's too bad. They don't think, oh, maybe it's because I'm, sitting on their head.
Hmm.
Right. And that's like, oh, this is the reason,
Yeah.
like, but that idea, if you give them pool noodles and they're having fun and they're doing it, even if you can't explain it yet and you have to go to your
Hmm.
co-teacher, your director, or whatever afterwards, if you have those supportive play-based people, and say, I'm not sure what was going on, but
But it was working.
it was working,
Yeah.
and in a way, that's what teaching with the body and mind, like that group are, all of us started with just getting together once a month and bringing up the ones of like, I don't know what was going on there, but it worked.
Hmm.
And then we started doing it as a podcast, but it started from observing more than reading. And the
Yeah.
weird thing is none of this, um it's the cultural component of early childhood,
Yeah.
right? There's so much that we do that we think is like, where in any literature has it been considered pool noodles are not a developmentally appropriate toy or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I even talk about, like, for all the time people spend on having kids sit while the teacher reads or the
Yeah.
teacher does something. And it's like, find in any state standard where sitting crisscross applesauce
Uh-huh.
for 10 minutes is a goal.
Right.
There's all these like cultural expectations that have nothing to do with child development. And we all
We
kind
fall right
of
into them.
we fall into them, but at the same time, if anyone asks us to explain it, it's like, well,
Yeah.
the kids need to sit.
Yep.
And it's like, and why do they need to? Can you
Yeah.
find it in this document? Can you find it?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it, excuse me, some of it is, just that this is the way we've always done it.
Right.
Some of it is the idea that even if we have really good, solid training on child development, whether it's a formal teacher prep or just, mentoring or whatever, it's easier to fall back to our own school memories, which are usually from when we were older and sitting was easier and we fell into that expectation. Um, but I think school readiness has impacts this too, right?
Right.
That's sort of connected. We have this idea that school is going to be so much sitting still and being quiet that the earlier we can train them into that,
Right.
the better teachers we are, the
Yeah.
better
Earlier is
students
better.
they'll be. And then it's just too easy to get lost in that pressure
Right.
without these moments of stopping and wondering about it
Right.
and thinking, how do I reframe this so that I can get out of it?
Yeah. And it is that thing, right? It's like losing sight of, because the explanations are all about the cultural thing of, well, this is the thing that's going to happen next, so I have to
Yeah.
do it now,
Yeah.
versus show me
Yeah.
research. I mean, for all the research-based language people use, show me the research that says this is what a 2-year-old needs with
Right.
the way their brain is developing,
Yeah.
that will then lead to this. And
Hmm.
there isn't, right? It's like it all does come down to the thing, whether you use the term schema or just talk about, other, exploring, physically
Hmm.
exploring cause and effect, and
Hmm.
physically doing things that'll eventually be mental
Right.
pathways. Um, and yet we keep falling back into it. I just did a workshop the other day, and I guess I still honed some of the language I use around this. So I talk about, don't mistake classroom expectations from classroom goals.
Oh,
If
okay.
your goal is something that you can pull out from the curriculum you use, the goal is for children to be engaged in book reading or whatever.
Yeah.
That's different than a classroom expectation, which is based on teacher comfort and adult timelines. So it has to
Okay.
happen. It has to happen during book time.
Yeah.
Therefore, I need all the kids to sit down. They have to be doing it at this time. But the curriculum goal in any good curriculum should never say when it happens. At 12 o'clock, this is when children learn book time. You know, there's nothing.
It's
in
9
any
o'clock,
written
Mike.
message. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I
9
don't know why I
o'clock
said
is when
12
children
o'clock.
learn books.
Yeah, that's right. But 12 o'clock is when they learn to use an inside voice while eating, right?
Right,
So,
yes.
but you know, just that idea that we get lost in we confuse the two, and then the kids who don't fit our teacher comfort become the misbehavior. You know, it still goes back to the same language, but I think sometimes it helps to pull those apart. Like, why can't you use pool noodles? Is it because there's so many things moving that you're dysregulated?
Yeah.
Well, okay, if it's your dysregulation based on a thing that kids want to do, are showing attention, they're respecting each other's boundaries, you can pull out all of these things in terms of social emotional goals, in terms of, you know, approaches to learning, whatever. You can pull out all this stuff, physical development, using their full arm, you know, movement from the shoulder. And so you can talk about it's a pre-writing skill. I mean, you can go in so many different directions of regulating things.
And the other thing, like it's authentic connection. It's not just manipulating language or whatever. It's an authentic connection that can be made.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And the other things are your comfort level, and your regulation, which as the adult, can you find ways to be regulated? Can you wear the loop ear plugs so it's not quite as loud for you? Or can you take that deep breath and know, like, wow, they are really having a good time. Right?
Look for the joy. There's a lot of joy in a pool noodle fight.
It's true. It's true. And I'm amazed how resistant people are to it.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, not every
a lot of the resistance is, what if someone sees me doing this? Honestly, like, I think more of us would be open and enthusiastic about play in general, but this kind of stuff that sometimes looks like misbehavior, if we didn't feel that pressure of, what if someone sees me doing this and I have to explain it?
Right.
Like, I really think that's where a lot of it comes from, is that fear.
I do remember, I've probably said this before, but it, you know, it's not even a humble brag, but in my classroom, we were near several universities. So people would often come observe, and people would either come into my classroom and wonder, is this guy licensed to be a teacher? You know what I mean? Because kids are all beating each other. Who knows? Or they'd come in and it's like the calmest classroom.
Oh yeah.
You know, I remember one, you know, psychology major went in to kind of watch a conflict, you know, like see what I do when kids have a conflict, and never got to see one, you know, there for like an hour and a half. And they're like, how did that happen? It's like, had you come in 10 minutes earlier, they would have been wrestling on the ground, still no conflict, but they were physically engaged, vigorously
engaged.
And yet, you know, that actually calms people down. I think that's part of it, is just not very little understanding. And again, this is where, why isn't this covered in more early childhood? Things of how children stay regulated with heavy work, which pool noodles are a great example. Or in like repetitive motion, and that children need that throughout the day. And a kid who gets dysregulated easily, you want to be, if the child doesn't find something, you need to provide something every hour and a half, 2 hours. And your day is going to be much easier. It's a lot easier to push a kid on a swing for 5 minutes
and to fight with that child for 5 minutes over what you want them to do.
And yet, you know, and then the other thing that happens when sometimes I'll see teachers will start to do it, and it's like, oh, the behavior is disappearing, so now I don't have to push them on the swing. Right, because it's so hard to, because you can't see something that doesn't happen. And so it's hard to equate the two. There was something that happened in the podcast episode we're supposedly talking about, where Dr. now I lost the name, Desautels refers to that, right? That idea that you don't see it in the moment, right? When she talks about those, like the 6 most important minutes or 9 most important minutes, like the 3 minutes, how a child enters, how a child leaves, and then those transitions. Those are the
Yeah.
most important times to be socially engaged. And too often, when I think of early childhood, we're focused on compliance.
Right.
The kid is not standing in line. And I'm thinking, like, why would you expect a 4-year-old to stand in line
Yeah.
when they can barely pay attention enough to, if the person in front of them stops, they won't notice
Yeah.
and they'll run into that person. So it actually takes a lot more cognitive power, whatever, for a 4-year-old to stay in line than it does for a 7 or 8-year-old. Like a 7 or 8-year-old can be talking to their friend
Oh,
and
oh.
still notice, oh, the line stopped. I stopped walking.
Uh-huh.
A 4-year-old's going to run into the person in front of them if they talk to their friend. And so then what we do is we say, well, don't talk to your friend. You got to pay attention.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Don't talk
what?
to your friend. I'm teaching you about social skills by calling
Right, right.
everybody friend, but I'm not letting you have friendship interactions because that's inconvenient.
Exactly. Right. But it's that thing. And that's where I feel like it's like, I mean, I guess it all comes down to developmental understanding. So a lot of what we do, especially in early childhood, is just forgetting these are not 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
Um, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of frustration trying to get kids to be 8-year-olds rather than letting them be the 2-year-old they are, or the 3-year-old they are, or the
Right.
4-year-old they are.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, this is where I like to pull out my example of a child who's not tall enough to drink from the drinking fountain. So of course, everyone would always say, well, let's get a step stool in.
Right.
With no questions asked. They're not tall
Yep.
enough. There's nothing we just get a step stool. The goal is
Right.
the drinking of the water. But when it's something else, like
Yeah.
uh, using a voice that's louder than we want them to do,
Right. Right.
automatically jump to misbehavior or we want to get them regulated again instead of just thinking, yeah, well, that's tough in this environment. They
Right.
need, maybe this is just what I just need to change my expectation because this is their reality. They're still figuring out voice modulation and
Right.
they're living in a group trying to get individual needs met. So sometimes you have to be louder, or this is just joyful and fun. And that means I'm going to be louder.
Yep.
For then, if I said, well, why don't you just maybe shift your expectations? There might be more resistance than when I say, why don't you just give them a footstool?
Right. I use that example all the time. I was going to bring it up a little earlier. And each time I do, I pull out the little trademark, your little logo to say, as Heather Bernt-Santy would say, if they weren't tall enough for the water fountain.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a helpful thing to remember because our own window of tolerance gets smaller at times.
Yeah, for sure.
And so especially cleanup time, lunchtime, nap time, like all those, any transition really, those are hard for adults too. Yeah. And so what we should do as adults, right, is take that deep breath, be mindful and demure and just like go out there and like, no, but think about what you're doing, right? Okay. They're going to be talking a lot. They're not going to walk in a straight line.
Yeah.
So what are we doing instead? Could we all be butterflies and look, oh, look, here's the flowers. Let's go sip the nectar. And we all fly over there and we can be in any pattern.
Yeah.
And it helps me as a teacher know, oh, they're flying in a butterfly pattern because butterflies go all over
This
the place.
isn't chaos. This is butterfly transitioning.
Exactly. But I find for myself that's helpful.
Yeah.
Right. And it is like a game. And yeah, it's more for me, but it's not a game that they don't want to play. It's more like, especially when I'm working with, another teacher or something, they can like, oh, okay. Yeah, it's like usually we're in line, but Mike's playing a butterfly game with the kids so they can fly around. And suddenly it's like, oh, we're all going to the same place.
Yeah.
But we went like
because
this.
That looks and feels teachery, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of it is, and that's fine if that's to, I think that's okay. But I think part of it is because we can rationalize it.
Right.
The movement or the
right.
disorder by saying, oh, this is me using a smart transition tool.
Right.
I'm still in control. I
yeah.
think
And my hope is the reflection then of like, and again, there's nothing wrong with feeling in control. But yeah, like, oh yeah, look at that. Yeah, they didn't line up and we were all okay.
Yeah.
And you can do the butterfly game, whatever. And I bet there's going to be 3 kids who really want to do it every time after once you do it. But for the others, like, can you then just like, oh yeah, this is the way they move,
Mhm.
right? And whether you keep doing the game or just start allowing the physical action, you
Yeah,
know, either way, that's fine. It's the baby steps for the adult, but the adult
right.
does have to feel regulated, does have to feel some sense of control. And the
Mhm.
control truly, if this, I don't know if it helps anyone, but it's like, is just remembering, are they safe? Are they happy?
Yeah,
And then the rest of it, is their newspaper getting thrown all around? Yeah. Or
yeah,
are they dumping the toys?
yeah,
Yeah. Like,
yeah,
is anyone getting hurt from this? No,
yeah,
and being able to, that we're the ones who have to step out of it, you
right.
know, and
Yeah,
so,
I think too often it's too easy. And I think this again comes often from the pressure that we feel to be either getting them ready for the next thing, or the pressure we feel because someone might see this and wonder what I'm doing.
right,
Um, we the question becomes, well, if I'm just letting kids do whatever they want, how am I a teacher?
right.
Um, well, we have to sort of shift. I was thinking about this the other day too, that because I think maybe I was talking to Carol Gerbo Murray about using teacher in the context of someone working with infants and how that's sort
Mhm.
of an uncomfortable thing to do. I was like, well, um, doctor can mean many different roles. Like it could be the medical
Right.
doctor, or it could be the English PhD. Like
Yeah, yeah,
we're able to contextualize words that way. And so maybe that's what we need to do here, is that you're still a teacher because you're using your knowledge of the children, and you're
right,
using the expertise you bring from whatever teacher prep you've had, and you're using your ongoing learning and professional development and maybe feedback from a coach. And that's how you're the professional teacher in the moment, not because you've
right,
made everything look like 8-year-old school.
right. And I do think, I find that there's a lot of teachers who find Lisa Murphy's like visual helpful of the foundation and then the columns of learning or whatever. I can't remember the
Yeah.
exact way she does it, but that idea of the foundation is basically play and care.
Yeah. The seven thing, her seven things or
And then
whatever.
the
There's a
seventh, yeah,
foundation of
yeah. And
play.
then
Yeah.
those lead to,
Yeah.
literacy, they lead to
Yeah.
scientific thinking, they lead to math skills. But without a foundation, if you go right to those things, the
Yeah.
child can't do other things. And you can, however you want to look at that, but as a teacher that might be helpful. Like, I
Yeah.
am creating the foundation, I'm creating a strong foundation, so by the time they're ready for this thing, it's
Yeah.
just gonna,
Yeah.
they've already been pretending for so long that they're starting to decode words, and now they're like, I want to hear the story.
Yeah.
They're the kid who's going to skip those readers because the story is boring
Uh-huh.
and go right to a storybook. Like they
Yeah.
need Junie B. Jones or something. They don't want, one of
Yeah.
those readers that is there just to learn to read.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that building that foundation really creates. And if you skip that, that's when you can talk to occupational therapists
Uh-huh.
about, yep, the kids who didn't do enough tummy time, who didn't learn to use their
Yeah.
hands in many ways, but went right to being told how to handwrite.
Mm-hmm.
And now they don't have the motor control they have. And OTs like have to like kind of step back. Like I had one OT explain, like, oh yeah, I have a lot of 7-year-olds that basically I'm doing tummy time
Really?
with.
Yeah.
Like, we're doing these games
God,
where
I love occupation
they're
therapy.
laying down and sitting up and doing things with their hands,
Uh-huh.
right? Because they're
Yeah.
not sitting in a chair and trying to use their hands
Yeah.
first, which
Yeah.
when you start having kids sitting in chairs at 3 and 4,
Uh-huh.
they're not getting the full range of motion in their arms and wrists.
Right.
They're,
It's that proximodistal, is that the word? For
yeah,
you start in the core and you're
right. Yeah,
developing
yeah,
things
exactly.
outward,
Yeah,
right? So if you want good
yeah,
finger grips on pencils, you have to start with a healthy core, a
right.
strong core, as much as we can. This is really nice because this is a good conversation. Yesterday, I texted you, Mike. Listeners don't know that, but you know this. I
Yeah,
texted and I was like, what do you do when you're writing a book and it just all starts to seem like it's bullshit?
right.
And that's exactly what was happening. I was talking about all these foundational things and these little pieces that lead into future literacy, and I was starting to be like, you're really just trying too hard to make this real, but it is real.
It is real, right? Yeah, yeah. No, and that's kind of when you had that conversation, because I already was like, there's a thing about the conversation you had that was going one direction, but I was curious how it fit development. Then when you texted yesterday, I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this is exactly the
Yeah.
thing, because
Good
the way
timing.
I wrote it was my actual like thing when I was listening, I wrote, where did I say it? So why did you decide that you needed to write about schema?
Oh,
Like, what was the motivating factor? And I think that's probably it, because so many people you work with would misinterpret behavior,
mm-hmm.
would not see it as teaching, would,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm sure now it's a little more if it's people who aren't in a early childhood classroom, if they're pre-service or maybe they,
Yeah.
have a smaller role, they might not quite get, well, why would how would letting kids dump out stuff be teaching?
Right. Yeah.
And if
Well,
you can
yeah, so it was
say,
a combination of that. Those
yeah,
connections were, I was making those connections and thought it would be helpful for others to see those connections. But also, when I talk about schema play, I see more like aha faces in the group than I do with any other
mhm,
topic that I talk about.
right, right.
It's really interesting to
And
me anyway.
for me, and I know this is like a sense of control for people
Yeah.
when there's like all this new stuff. For me, when I first learned schema, I'm trying to, oh wait, was that enveloping or
Yeah.
was that
Yeah.
enclosing or what?
Yeah.
And like it doesn't matter, right? Like the actual labels are things adults put on it,
Yeah.
and that it could be there's a reason to talk about, because how would you talk in a book if you didn't
Right.
use language? But I mean, when you're in the room and you're watching a kid, you don't have to figure out which thing is it. It's much
No.
more, oh, they're really enjoying this. It's
Yeah.
meeting a certain need.
And
And
it
if
is
they're
a hook for,
repeating it, it's a thing that their brain,
yeah,
they
needs
are
to do.
creating a neural pathway. They're strengthening those connections, building
Yeah.
more axon connections, myelination is increasing,
Mm-hmm.
like all of that. So later on, they can like whatever, picture how this,
Figure
yeah,
out
yeah,
arithmetic.
exactly.
Yeah.
Or how to fix this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was with, well, oh, okay, I'm going to use one more last example.
Okay.
I'm
I'm
sitting
ready.
down with this guy I've met for a while, and he's always fascinated me because he's got that engineering mind where, I don't know, we talked about turpentine at one point, and he's like, I don't
The
exactly know what
most interesting
turpentine
conversation.
is. It's like, I mean, I know it's a solvent, but like,
Yeah.
what exactly is, he's like thinking in his head, what's the chemical property that's
Uh-huh.
creating this thing? And he's fascinated that he doesn't know. Or, looking at something and it's like, how is it making that motion?
Uh-huh.
Is there a crankshaft doing that? Is that whatever? Like constantly, you're just walking down the street with him and he's like, oh, I
Wow.
wonder, whatever, oh, a double pulley, or I don't know, like, and as we're talking for a while, he suddenly asks if I knew this person. That it had come up something about that I had done puppetry. It's like, oh, do you know this guy? I was like, yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I used to take classes. There's this after school program in Minneapolis called, or I guess it's in St. Paul now, but in the Twin Cities called Leonardo's Basement.
Cool.
And the whole idea is that it's creating it's learning science, engineering, all that through arts,
Uh-huh.
right? And so this, whatever he is, late 20s person talks about, oh yeah, when I was younger, I would do these things. And then we're talking for a while and realize we were at the same thing where this friend of ours had built a human-sized hamster wheel. And I was talking about how I was like, I'm running it. And the thing
Yeah.
is, as soon as you stop, your feet stay gripped and you're about to fall on your face. And then I said I hung out for a while because there were all these kids, and we figured out that he was one of those 8-year-olds who's just obsessed with it and doing it all the time.
Uh-huh.
But my point is, like, he was physically doing these things, so he knew when I'm running, because he even said something about, oh, because he said, well, yeah, it's different because the mass distribution is different because that wheel had to be made out of wood, which is the weight ratio of the wheel versus the human body or whatever. He just started
Uh-huh.
talking about all the physics of it now. And this is what he does for a living is, designs mechanical things. but it started from running in a hamster wheel and knowing if you stopped, you will fall over, or if you
Yeah.
go fast enough, you might make it almost upside down before you fall, or
Oh
whatever,
my God. Yeah.
if your friends are also spinning it from the outside, whatever. But just that, like, it's the physical thing.
Hmm.
And now, when we just, like I said, walk down the street and he sees something, and it's in his head, is going through what it must be.
Hmm.
And it's because of all these things he's done physically
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
things, including his body,
Yeah.
that
So I mean, we
that
talk
creates that.
about we're always really happy to talk about constructivist learning when it's just cognitive, but
Right,
we could make it physical. We could make a case for physical learning also
right,
being
right,
part of that constructivist
right.
practice,
For sure. I mean,
or physical
the
experience being
sports
part of that.
thing, um, I don't understand the physics of it, nor do I watch football. But my coworker's dad was a professional football player. But talking about like the way you throw a ball
Uh-huh.
and like the spin you put on it and the trajectory,
Sure.
all
A
of
tight
that,
spiral, we
the
call
tight
it.
spiral, thank you. And it goes to a person who is running.
Yeah.
And so you're throwing it so that the time it takes to go up in the air and
Yeah.
down will go right where the person is running to.
Yeah. It's a lot of geometry.
It's a lot of geometry, and often those quarterbacks aren't engineers. They
Uh-huh.
aren't, like, they don't have a master's or
Hmm.
doctorate in mechanical engineering or whatever that would
Yeah.
be. But you give them a football compared to anybody who does have a PhD who could explain
Uh-huh.
their trajectory, but they couldn't throw it.
Right.
And that person can throw it, right?
Hmm.
And we need both those people. When I always,
Yeah.
dentists are the one I always use. I need someone who understands teeth
Yeah.
and all
Hmm.
that, but also has the physical dexterity
Yeah.
to actually get the cavity out without stabbing me,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
except where the
Hey,
part where it's numb. So on that note,
guess who has a tooth phobia?
oh, sorry.
Guess what has
It
two thumbs and
reminds
a
me
tooth
of,
phobia? This
yeah.
girl.
No, but I but just thinking about that, there's physical skill in a lot of things, and we
Yeah.
do put a lot of emphasis on the mental, and yet our world doesn't work without people
Right.
who can physically, whatever, fix the roads or
Yep.
um
Yeah.
make your espresso, whatever.
But especially the espresso.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I want that leaf pattern on my latte. None of this.
Exactly right. I'll take a pothole in the road, but I need that latte to be just right.
Exactly.
Not really. Anyway. Okay. Anything else? Did we do it? Are we done?
I think so. It was compliance over, I'm looking at the
Connections over
title,
compliance.
connection over compliance. And so
Yeah.
I think that one was focused on the connection, and I just wanted to also address that,
Get
like,
some compliance in there.
but compliance versus just development, I guess, is
Yeah.
what we did, right? And
Yeah.
I think we did it, and um, I think there's something about your water fountain example that I think is even better than there's no such thing as misbehavior
Oh, really?
as well.
Okay. Excellent.
And I think that that's the part about the book you're working in now. I think that's that key, right? That
Yeah.
understanding it, you can appreciate what it does and where this child goes to, and you are the teacher because you are building that foundation. They can
Mhm.
then make a hamster wheel for humans, or
Yeah.
make your latte.
Right. Whatever that need is out there that someone
Exactly.
else needs filled. Yeah. Cool. Well,
Yeah.
thanks. This was fun. It's always fun. Well, anytime we're talking, but especially these Mike Asks Heather episodes.
Yeah, we'll have to do another one sometime.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose we could make that work. All right. Well, thanks for being here, Mike. And thanks
Yeah.
everybody for listening. Come back next week for another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.